Welcome to our next installment of Building Perspectives with Mike and Simon. I'm Simon.
I'm Mike.
Bit of a change of location for our installment today. We're actually coming to you from our Louisville office. Normally we're in our Lexington office. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, Simon. So it came out a bit ago, and it's really, a lot of it hinges around about $270 billion worth of tax credits. And those tax credits are around build-outs of renewable energy, electric vehicle technology, improvement of efficiencies in buildings and communities and those sorts of things. The credits can really, they have a base credit, and then it can be up to 5 times that base credit if people adhere to the rules. So, the rules really revolve a lot around hiring people at prevailing wage. It also revolves a lot around having apprentices to do some of the work or some piece of the work in terms of people to apprentices, those types of things. It can get pretty gnarly. The IRS came out with a notice, 2022-61, that came out a bit ago also. That became effective on January 30th. That really had the rules around that. So, this can be a pretty daunting task to some people, especially if you have people who are owners of buildings or building the buildings and hire contractors in. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this goes.
Well, one of the big things with this act is it doesn't just impose a burden on the taxpayer. The taxpayer is going to get the credit, and the taxpayer has to conform to the prevailing wage and the apprenticeship rules in order to get that tax credit.
Right.
But in most cases, they're hiring a construction company to do all the work.
Yes.
So the taxpayer is not going to be in control of compliance.
Right.
That is going to roll downhill
Yes.
to the construction company. So it's going to be up to the construction company to make sure that the taxpayer is in compliance with the act.
That's right.
Which
Exactly.
is not normal.
It's not. No, not at all. And one little slip up here could take your credit down from that 5 times bonus down to the base level. I mean, one slip up on either the construction company or the person who has the building.
Well, if I'm the taxpayer and I'm building a building and I hire a construction company to build it for me, and I take the credit and I get audited,
Yep.
and the IRS says you didn't meet the rules of the act, you don't get the credit, who am I blaming?
Well, you're blaming the construction company.
Yeah, and I'm putting them on notice that if the IRS is not going to give me my credit, then the construction company is. I'm guessing it's going to be written into the contract.
It would have
on
to
the
be.
project.
I would think it would have to be. I would think most of these folks would be like, okay, if you're going to bid on this job, then I expect you to adhere to the rules of the credit of the IRA in order for your piece of the work to be done. I need my credit.
Yeah, and that's probably going to be written into the contract.
Yeah, I would think.
If I don't get my credit because you construction company didn't meet the criteria,
didn't cross the T's and dot the I's,
then guess what? We have a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get my credit by hook or by crook,
Yeah.
whether it's from the government or whether it's from you, ABC Construction Company.
That's right. Tell me a little bit, Simon, about the prevailing wage piece of this.
Well, I think the prevailing wage area is the area of the act that probably concerns me the least, because we've got a lot of construction companies out there that are used to doing federal jobs or state jobs where they're required to comply with the prevailing wage. If they're a union shop, that's normally a non-issue. If you're a merit shop, I think most merit shops are used to working in that environment and knowing how to get the prevailing wage.
Yeah.
I do think maybe with this act, with its focus on renewable energy and stuff like that, it's going to pull in construction companies that maybe are not used to operating at prevailing wage.
If I'm that construction company and I want to bid this job, the person that's hiring me wants the credit, and I need to find prevailing wage information. Where do I go for that?
Well, you're going to get it from the DOL.
Okay.
The easiest way is to go out to their website. And you know, you look at the locality of the job, you look at the type of labor you're using, and it's that website is more than likely going to give you the prevailing wage. If that website doesn't have the prevailing wage information on it that you need, then it's a question of emailing the DOL's wage and hour division and getting it from them. Now, the Act does say that the DOL decides the prevailing wage. So if you've got information from the DOL that says this is the prevailing wage, you're going to be fine. Nobody can, the IRS is not going to be able to challenge you on that. But you do want to make sure you've got that documentation.
Right. And my understanding is everybody that works on that particular job has to meet the prevailing wage requirement.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, if you have one or two people that don't meet the prevailing, you're paying somebody different than others, you could have a problem with trying to get the 5 times the credit.
Yeah, I think
on top of the base amount.
I think the Act says something along the lines of all laborers, mechanics, and other workers. Something like that. I don't know why they singled out laborers and mechanics, but I think that's the wording in the Act.
Okay. Gotcha. What about the apprenticeship rules?
So the apprenticeship rules, I think, are the rules that maybe are more difficult to navigate. And so, in essence, what the apprenticeship rules say is it's determined based upon when a project starts. And there's guidance out there to determine as to when your project starts. But it looks at the start date. And it basically says if the start date of the job is before January the 1st, 2023, then 10% of the workers on the project on a daily basis have to be apprentices. If it starts after 12/31/22, but before January the 1st, 24, so in essence, calendar year 23, that's what we're talking about. If it starts in calendar year 23, then 12.5% of your labor have to be apprentices. And then if it starts after 12/31/23, so 24 or beyond, you're now up to 15% of your labor have to be apprentices. Now, you can't just say, oh, these guys are apprentices. They've actually got to be part of a registered apprenticeship program. So then you have the question, well, what's a registered apprenticeship program?
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, for it to be a registered apprenticeship program, it's got to be registered under the National Apprenticeship Act. So now we're pulling all sorts of stuff in because we've already had Davis-Bacon as a related act for prevailing wage. Now we've got the National Apprenticeship Act for the apprenticeship side of it. So in essence, to get registered under that act, you're going to have a program that's been industry vetted and then that it's been approved by the DOL Office of Apprenticeships. Or, instead of the DOL, it's been approved by the State Apprenticeship Agency. So we've got the DOL OA and the SAAs that can all help register these programs.
Well, it's great that Congress decided to make this simple for folks, and made it to where anybody can do it just if you have a construction company. Yeah, honestly, this seems like it is just a mountain of stuff to keep up with and a daunting task. So to me, as I'm looking through this, you've got an increasing cost because now you're going to have to pay people prevailing wage. Mm-hmm. You've got probably an increasing cost and lack of efficiency because you're going to have apprentices on these jobs. Mm-hmm. But nobody ever talks about the ancillary costs associated with keeping track of the documentation, the administrative burden for that, the HR burden for that, to trying to find these people that are going to work that are apprentices. It just seems like it is a whole lot to go through.
It is going to be a very different mindset when you're putting together your bid, because there's going to be a lot of costs in this bid that potentially you've never factored into a bid before.
Yeah.
So going back to prevailing wage, okay, we can figure out what the prevailing wage is, and if we pay our people less than that prevailing wage, we'll pay them more. Well, how? How are you going to do that? Are you going to change their pay rates? and what problems does that cause?
Yeah.
Or, more normally what we see in these environments is that merit shops will make extra fringe payments. So they'll put money into a 401k plan to bring those employees up to prevailing wage, because you can meet prevailing wage through either wage or fringes.
Yeah.
But if you've not got a 401k already in place, and you've now got to create a 401k for these employees so that you can put extra fringe in there to meet prevailing wage, well, now you've got an administration cost for a 401k plan.
Right.
Maybe you've got a small 401k plan that hasn't had to be audited, but putting extra people in it for these fringes is now going to take you over that threshold, and you've now got a 401k that does need to be audited under the DOL rules because of the number of participants. So there's a ton of considerations just on prevailing wage. Then you get to apprenticeships and you're like, well, am I going to run my own program? Well, that comes with a cost, because if you don't already have a program, you've got to figure out how to set it up. You've got to make sure that the apprenticeships are getting 144 hours a year classroom time. How are you going to achieve that? What cost does that come with? And making sure that you've got enough journeymen to actually supervise those apprenticeships.
Right.
Because, these percentages are out there, and it says 12.5%. Well, you can't just say, well, I'm going to be on the safe side, and I'll just have 60% of my workforce on this project being apprentices, because then you could fall foul of the criteria of, well, do you even have enough journeymen on site to supervise the apprentices that are out there? So it's not just the percentages we've got to worry about that are in the Act. You've also got to worry about, are my ratios there in order for these apprentices to be appropriately supervised?
And then you've got to take a 10,000-foot look at it and look down and say, do the ends justify the means on this deal? Does it make sense for me to even bid this job with all this stuff that I've got? Now, some people may have all this in place.
Yep.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Go after it.
Yeah.
If you don't have this in place, you've really got to count the cost of it to see if it makes sense for you and your company.
I think these are potentially jobs that have a significant amount of risk in addition to the normal risks we deal with when we're bidding on jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt, because, it's the risk of compliance and non-compliance, the risk of missing costs in your bid, so you end up with, the owner, taxpayer, getting a really nice tax credit. You don't see that tax credit.
No.
The taxpayer gets the credit. So as a construction company, you don't get the credit, but you've now got a loss-making job.
Yeah.
Because of all the costs you've incurred.
I could see
to
this
get the owner
definitely
their tax
hitting
credit.
margins. I could see this definitely being an impact to margins.
Well, you've got to make sure that, if an owner's paying so much money for a project, knowing that they're getting this huge tax credit in addition, you want to be increasing your cost.
Absolutely.
To get a portion, in essence, of that tax credit, because you need to be reimbursed as a construction company for taking on this additional risk.
Yeah, that's right.
Of just administering these programs. And the Act talks over and over again about documentation. If any of these owners of these projects gets audited by the IRS, is going to say, for this credit, show us all the documentation you have that's required under the Act.
Yep.
So as a construction company, one, there's a cost to providing all of that documentation.
Absolutely.
Because we don't normally provide that to owners.
That's right.
So what's the cost of actually preparing all of that documentation? But you've also got the back end risk of, if the IRS says, okay, the documentation you got from the construction company, if they say that's not sufficient, then the owner is going to come back to you maybe years after you finish the job and say, okay, here's the extra documentation we want, and guess what? If you don't have the documentation and I lose my credit, I'll be calling my attorney.
Yeah, that's right.
So a ton of extra risk on these jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Simon. Always good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thanks for joining us on this installment of Building Perspectives. We'll see you next time.